Hi, and welcome to our second episode of Starship Gaming. And today we are going to discuss a game that many gamers have fought over and debated whether it really truly was or not. And it involves one of the greatest Nintendo 64 games of all time. And that game is GoldenEye 007 for Nintendo 64. But the question remains, was GoldenEye 007 truly a clone of the famous 1993 MS-DOS game Doom? Well, today we're going to figure out if that is the case. But to determine any similarities or differences between the two games, we have to look at each game for ourselves. First, let's take a look at the game Doom. Doom is a 1993 MS-DOS game created by ID Software, and originally it was released as shareware. Over the years, it saw many ports to many different consoles, including the Super Nintendo, the Atari Jaguar, and the Sony PlayStation. I remember growing up playing the Super Nintendo version, which was at the time it was awesome, but when you look at it in retrospect, it wasn't the best port of the game. But oh my god, that red cartridge, that blood red cartridge was so flippin' awesome. Doom was presented in a first-person view, which means your weapons and whatnot were placed in front of you while you technically didn't see your body. Which, I guess you could say that's an out-of-body experience. Okay, enough of the jokes, let's move on. Now we get to talk about GoldenEye 007. GoldenEye 007 was a 1997 video game created by Rareware, now known as Rare, and now owned by Microsoft. Well, anyway, GoldenEye 007 was based on the 1995 James Bond film of the same name, which I must add was probably one of the best James Bond films ever made. The origins of GoldenEye 007 go all the way back to the Super Nintendo, when Rareware, for the sake of time we'll just call it Rare because that's what it's known as now, Rare decided that they were going to create a side-scroller based on the James Bond film of the same name. Well, eventually that fell through, and they decided, hey, let's not make a game for the Super Nintendo, it's going to be old news soon. Let's move on to development of a game for the Nintendo 64. And thus, GoldenEye 007 as we know it today became the standard, but that wasn't always the case. Originally, it was going to be an on-rail shooter, similar to games such as Virtua Cop, which was released at the time by Sega for the arcades, and in addition to the Sega Saturn. Going back to GoldenEye 007 for the Super Nintendo, that it was going to be a side-scroller, this is because of the success of Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2, which were released as this was in development. But, as we all know, that didn't happen, and now we have the first-person view of GoldenEye 007 that we have now for the Nintendo 64. Now, it's never been explicitly said by any of the developers of GoldenEye 007, but could it be a Doom clone? Well, let's take a look at the evidence. The first bit of evidence that we have for the case of the similarities between the two is the first-person view, which has now become known as the first-person shooter. As you see here in Doom, and as you see here in GoldenEye 007. Well, if you ever wondered, yes, the modern first-person shooter has derived from Doom, which later led to multiple clones in the 90s. Another mechanic that is part of both Doom and GoldenEye is actually just flipping switches, which is pretty much in a lot of games. But for the cause of showing two similarities, we're going to say that the system that was set up in GoldenEye and the system that was for Doom are one and the same. But there are also many differences too between the two games, such as GoldenEye 007 having a list of objectives that you must complete before reaching the end of each level, while in Doom you just kind of fight your way to the end of each level, which really, in retrospect, is kind of the same, but you have actual things to do in GoldenEye before you can actually finish the level, because if you don't, you cannot get to the end of the level. Simple as that. And while there is literally dozens upon dozens of similarities and differences we could make between the two games, our video is just a brief description, which means we only have time to list two. But if you actually want to find out fully for yourself to get a good understanding of the similarities and differences between both games, actually play them. Don't watch a playthrough, whatever you do. Only do it if you don't have time. Actually, physically, buy the game. Doom, do whatever you have to do to find Doom. Just don't pirate it. Actually buy it. If you want to know a great version of Doom, that's what Google's for. But the thing is, there is just so much stuff we could go over. It would literally take hours to explain similarity and differences between both games. And that's why we don't have time, because this is only a brief review. We're under 10 minutes. So, just wanted to put that out there. Now, let's move on and make our determination whether both games are the same or different, or if one's a clone or not. So, here we go. The answer of whether GoldenEye 007 is a Doom clone or not is absolutely yes, it is. GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64 is absolutely a Doom clone, and I'll tell you why. It follows a lot of the same mechanics. The first-person view, very similar, and pretty much that's what we've determined. Of course, you may have your own opinion. This is just an opinion piece. Under 10 minutes. But that's up for you to determine. But we are going to say that this was the 90s. There were literally dozens of Doom clones. There were ones such as the game Disruptor for Sony PlayStation. Quake. Yes, Quake is a Doom clone. Sorry, fanboys, it's true. So next time that you want to play GoldenEye 007, now you can realize that it originated from Doom, but it perfected the system that Doom created, and so on and so forth. And from there, it went on to inspire games such as Perfect Dark and one of the greatest science fiction games of all time, Halo. So, you can thank GoldenEye for that.